Looks like we have a good number of folks joining us today, approximately 30 attendees. So welcome everyone. Let's see here. So welcome to Decolonizing Health and the Resilient Recovery Needed for Women and Girls. I'm basically going to go through a few housekeeping things if you're especially new to Zoom webinars. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and share. Can you? Let's see. We'll do this one. So for those that registered, this presentation will be recorded and shared. So for future reference, even if you don't attend with us in real time, as long as you registered, you'll receive the PowerPoint and the recorded presentation. You may exit at any time. We value your time, so you don't have to let us know. You can just exit if you have another meeting or any other items that you need to attend to. This is also not the same as a Zoom meeting. Webinars, attendees are unable to view each other. And then also for questions, if you could please use the Q&A feature, and that's located at the bar at the bottom of your screen. And if you do decide to chat with us, we are the ones, the presenters and the hosts will be the only ones that will see your chat. You will also automatically be added to our email group for future presentations, so you don't have to worry about that. And then if you could please complete the evaluation at the end, we would greatly appreciate it. So my name is Lisa Ka'anoi, and I am the engagement specialist for the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Scholarship Program. And I will be introducing our presenters. So first of all, we have Dr. Kealoha Fox, who is a Native Hawaiian scientist, practitioner, and advocate based in Hawaii. She's the Native Hawaiian liaison and manages public policy at Aloha Care, a nonprofit safety net plan in Hawaii. She's the author of Haumea, Transforming the Health of Native Hawaiian Women and Empowering Wahine Well-Being, focusing on Indigenous resilience of women and girls. Kealoha is a lifelong public servant and Obama leader for the Asia Pacific region at the Obama Foundation. Mahalo, Dr. Kealoha Fox, for joining us. And we also have Khara Jabola-Carolus. She is the executive director of the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women. Previously, Khara served as the public affairs director of Strategies 360, the largest political strategist firm in the Western United States. She also directed the Hawaii Coalition for Immigrant Rights, where she passed landmark legislation that extended driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. She earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Hawaii with a specialization in Native Hawaiian law. We're so happy to have you both on such a special day, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Mahalo, Papa'olelo Kahi, the Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship Program, and Lisa, Kim, and the whole team that have invited us here today. This program is very special to me, and I know this program is special to many Native Hawaiians who have excelled in medicine, in nursing, social work, dentistry, pharmacy, so on and so forth. These kind of programs are really critical to the conversations we're having today about decolonizing health and healthcare, and having a special focus on resiliency and recovery for wahine, for women and girls. We wanted to start by having a brief introduction that you'll see the plus signs throughout our presentation today. It's central to the work that Khara and I do as public servants, as advocates, as scientists, and as sisters in the community, that we're not just talking about binary women and girls. We're talking about wahine, we're talking about mahu, trans, two-spirit people, and we're very inclusive in the work that we do. And so we bring all of those identities and the ways in which people characterize themselves into this space today. This day is one of deep reflection and significance in our community and to Hawaii as a whole. It's la ho'i ho'i ea. And I'm going to read just a small description from La Ho'i Ho'i Ea Honolulu, many of who are here with us today and are participating in other critical conversations, webinars, Zoom meetings, Facebook Lives, all over the Pai'aina today. So we bid them all aloha aina now as they are having their own deep discussions. July 31st is a national holiday, Sovereignty Restoration Day. King Kamehameha III established this holiday in days-long celebration following the rightful return of the sovereign government to Hawaii by the United Kingdom after an illegal seizure by one of their representatives. Kamehameha proclaimed, "O mau ke ea o ka aina I ka pono," the ea, our sovereignty, our life, our breath of our land is perpetuated through justice. Hawaiians continue to breathe life into our sovereignty, into our ea, and this is one of the ways in which we celebrate today's law all around the Pai'aina. After decades of suppression, the celebrations were revived in 1985 by Uncle Kekuni Blaisdell and other Kanaka Aloha Aina as a way to give voice to Hawaiian independence and the issues surrounding the return and demilitarization of Hawaiian lands. Each year on this day, you'll usually find me with my fellow Kanaka Aloha Aina in Pa'awilo at Huimau. We usually are together sharing year after year from Honolulu to Hamakua on today. I quote my friends in Hamakua and I bid them fond aloha aina. No kapono, kapomaikai, kaholomua, kalanakila, a me ka hanohano o kalahui. Aloha. We'll start this webinar today with a presentation and a background of the context of where have we been and where are we going. We'll share some recommendations, we'll share important policies that you should be aware of, and some how-tos. We have prepared 2 questions for participants, and we hope to have you engage with us in the Q&A feature and also in the chat feature. We know we're having these important conversations digitally and virtually, but that doesn't make them less significant. So please find ways to connect with us during this webinar or after. Khara and I are always here. And then we'll turn it back over to Papa Ololokahi and their team, as this is the final webinar of the Ola na ʻŌiwi series for this year, and they'll share you more about what's to come. We have several learning objectives today, so please, if you're an educator, if you're a teacher, if you have practicum students and interns and postdoc fellows, please share this with them. We hope that this is a supplemental resource to you, and we have many links that we'll be sharing in the chat at the same time. It's an opportunity for us to engage and learn together, to have growth in the conversation, but most importantly, for us to act positively and cross-collaboratively in our organizations in Hawaii. I'll start by painting a picture to the background of one of the Kanaka Aloha Aina that I had mentioned in that brief introduction about why today is important, July 31st. This year, just a few months ago, I had an opportunity with 2 of my mentors, Dean Dr. Noreen Mokuau and Dr. Kamana Opono Crab, to publish an article in Hulili, the multidisciplinary journal of well-being published by the Kamehameha schools in tribute of his honor and his steadfast aloha aina and what it means for us to bring aloha aina into health, healthcare, medicine, public health, and practice that we are continuing to revive. The link for this article is fully available and free to you and your staff and your students, which I hope is being offered to you in the chat. What you'll read in our reflection in our time as we came together after the passing of Kekuni is ways in which we as Noreen and Kamana'o and I in our intergenerational training and the intergenerational transferring of knowledge under Kekuni's learning have really captured some of those hallmarks and principles to the values in which we are decolonizing the work that we do and trying to decolonize healthcare from 1985 until today in 2020. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those ways that we have embedded those hallmarks into that publication, but into the work that we do as living Kanaka, that we encourage this distinction and we're breaking cycles of cultural trauma and revitalizing our healthy, strong cultural identity. Those strengths and resilience are foundational to us to shift a paradigm that's not simply deficit-spaced, but also does not erase the struggle and the need of many of our people that continue today, centuries and decades and generations since we have started to track them and monitor them over time. Critical to the work of Keikuni that we have done together as a team with Noreen Kamana'o and I and many, many others, hundreds and thousands of others, is we are embracing the active use of Hawaiian cultural values in practice. So when we talk about decolonizing health, we're not simply just talking about healthcare. We're not just talking about the doctor's office. We're also talking about ea. We're talking about ola. We're talking about lomi lomi and ho'oponopono and hula, and the ways in which we learn from our kupuna and we gain reverence to this place through our aina. These are all part of our healing traditions in our oihana maoliola, and that's critical to even the ways in which we define health and decolonizing health for the future. We ask that those of you that are in positions to lead support, provide mentoring to Kanaka Maoli. That's one of the greatest hallmarks of the Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship Program. It's one of the most important reasons why the Eola Mau Task Force put such emphasis on education and training and lifelong development and training for those of us that are Kanaka Maoli, so that we can learn our disciplines, that we can become experts, and we can translate that knowledge into action. That's how we nurture leadership in our Kanaka community. And that's also how we have a collective vision that is forward-looking, a vision of ola for our people, our homeland, and our ever-expanding Vaivai. I wanted to start with more of the background of our traditions of Maoliola. And this is where I'll start to center it on conversations of wahine, of women, of girls, of mahu included. Maoliola being our spiritual, our environmental, our emotional, mental, and social and physical health, right? Everything that's all encompassing, not linear, not based in silos, but integrated every day in the ways in which we live our lives and our families live their lives. So we're not just talking about the health of one person, we're talking about the health of the family, of the community, of our nation, and the lahui. If the health of our land, of our aina, our environment is well, so too are the people. And if the people are healthy and well, then our lands can once again thrive. They can be healthy and clean. We'll see that in our air, in our water, in our foods, and especially in the work that we do that links our spiritual connection as the highest order of well-being for all of us. At the core of this well-being and this maoliola is our mana. It's that real construct and value of what is Indigenous resilience. What does it look like to have power in place and power in our positions, and to use that power for good, as our ali'i, as our chiefs and our chiefesses have always done for many generations in time immemorial. It's time that we embed these traditions of maoliola into the work that we do in health and medicine, in science and policy, to decolonize health and decolonize well-being, that we don't continue to perpetuate these myths, and that what we do perpetuate and spend time on is really some of the exciting work that Khara will be sharing with us, and how we can get involved locally and socially and collectively to act. It's important too, I'll share some examples of how are we restoring some of the resilience and the intergenerational passing of knowledge within our matriarchy. How are those actions and values collective and reciprocal to community-based resilience? So we'll focus on some of those areas, though they're brief. There's many resources that we're happy to share with you. And again, we hope that you'll share more about what your kupuna have taught you, what your kumu have shared in their wisdom, and how we can do this work for community-driven change together. Community-driven change that is based towards equity, justice, and our self-determination. I wanted to start a little bit in not only where we are today, but the foil between today and 200 years ago. So what you'll see on the right side of your screen here is a timeline of Western economic drivers in Hawaii. They've each been color-coded by major industry. And you'll see where we start in sandalwood, the trade of ʻiliahi, towards today, and visitors, the tourism industry. What you will easily see in this slide and the representation of graphic on your right is that each one of these industries have a peak and then they collapse. So if we're to move this time period, which is based on decades out, you'll see here that this data is, it's up to 2009. And this is important for us to think about, where are we now in 2020? Where is the next economic driver and that peak and that collapse once again? So just like we see in the blue with the whaling industry, it emerges 200 years ago in Hawaii. You see a high peak for about 20 to 30 years, one generation of time. And then you see the industry collapse fairly quickly. That industry is quickly brought back up by industrial agriculture. Many people in Hawaii are very familiar with sugar and pineapple because many of our families can trace their roots back to their immigrant history, who have worked those plantations and the backs of labor which those industries were built upon. Again, industries that have collapsed and have left a significant void in where we are today. And so we want to talk about the context of these issues within these weakened industrial systems prior to the pandemic, right? We didn't just arrive here in March 2020 into today of where we are in July 2020. We're talking about collapses that have been happening in weakened systems that have been happening for years before the pandemic. This includes a weakened public health system that's often underfunded. It's complicated and it can work in silos. Like I had said, tourism, agriculture, the military, our export economy, and luxury development. Aloha Care's building alone, which is in the area known as Kealoha, many people refer to it today as Ala Moana, is surrounded by 7 new luxury development towers that are going up. That's the view that I see outside of our building every day. And it makes me wonder where we are at when this graph and these changes occur for the coming decades. And so I want to contextualize these weakened industrial systems and the specific gendered impacts that we've been able to measure, monitor, and develop over time. This is something that Khara and our respective agencies and our roles and our teams are very well versed in. And so we wanted to bring you facts and statistics to not only broaden the conversation, but to also ensure that you have up-to-date important information to share with your team and help to derive solutions that take note of these gendered inequities and disparities that we have been monitoring for some time now. So you'll see two boxes, the blue and the orange box to the left of this faint black line. So what we know today is 56% of the job losses during the pandemic have been experienced by women. We also know that caregiving rates are at an all-time high, both caregiving of children, but also caregiving of partners and elders. So for instance, if we were to take the average case study in Hawaii shows a 62-year-old woman caring for an elderly parent or husband while still working. Many of these 62-year-old women, as the average case study, also live in multi-generational households or are responsible for generations that are multi-generational. So I also wanted to bring up a couple of the other statistics that we know. These are impacts that we've been monitoring and publishing for the past few years that help to demystify what the status quo is, because we have better disaggregated data now for gender than we've ever had. And this is one of the places where Hawaii can continue to lead, and especially where our groups can continue to be strong voices for the solutions ahead. It's because we have these great statistics and facts. So we know that women like us are overrepresented in the service industry. So Khara and I, for example, as Native Hawaiian and Filipino women, we are more likely to serve your food, to change the linens in your hotel room than we are likely to be at board decision tables making decisions about these industries, about healthcare and tourism and agriculture. That's just a simple fact. And we know that within those areas of sectors and service, industries and occupations, that Native Hawaiian women in particular make up a large proportion of the arts, food, and accommodation industry. This is troubling when you compare our overrepresentation in those two sectors with where we're underrepresented. Women in Hawaii are underrepresented in natural resource management, fishing, forestry, construction. That includes green energy, green jobs, and environmentally friendly positions. So when we talk about traditions of Moliola and an ecosystem that decolonizes health, we want to, again, ascend to that level where the highest level of our health is our spirit attached to this aina, and our aina attached to each and every one of us as people. But if we're not represented in those industries, then who is making those decisions on behalf of whom? For now, we know that it's not women in Hawaii. Sadly, only 1 in 10 business owners in Hawaii are Native Hawaiian owned. This is fairly similar statistics that we see for Pacific Islander women, Filipino women. Native Hawaiian women alone make up 19,000 years less than non-Hawaiian males in the state. That accumulates to over $1 million less earned over a Native Hawaiian woman's lifetime. And so when we talk about gender equity and justice and self-determination for women, we're also talking about the gender pay gap, where Native Hawaiian women are paid only 71 cents on the dollar than men get paid for the exact same positions and the exact same work. So we're talking about deep inequities, and we're also contextualizing them. They're not new to Hawaii and our shores. They have been happening across our generations, and they have been happening over time. And so what does that mean for those of us that work in health and medicine and that understand that the greater context of well-being is very complex? Well, we know that there are many, many disparities experienced by Native Hawaiian women and girls that we have to address that are intersectional, right? That get us out of our silos and start to help us think about the social determinants of health and the cultural determinants of our health. And so it's important while we have conversations about self-determination for restoration and resilience, we also don't erase those that need help. They need the social safety net. They need agencies and organizations such as Aloha Care and the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women, which is attached to the Department of Human Services, that offer these safety net programs. These safety net programs have to be strengthened and they have to be preserved, not just for this year and the economic collapse that we're seeing, but for the decade to come. So at Aloha Care, we are largely a women, infants, and children plan, 72% as a matter of fact. We account for 1/4 of the Medicaid births in Hawaii, and 100% of our members, of the patients on our plan, live in poverty. We have seen a dramatic rise in Medicaid enrollment since March. So we're definitely tracking that. And where we're seeing tremendous rise is on the neighbor islands. 2 neighbor islands in particular, we're really seeing really large increases in Medicaid enrollment. That's especially the island of Kauai and the island of Maui, Molokai and Lanai, which make up Maui County. And that's important because we'll bring up some of the solutions ahead later. So because we know what the status and health disparities are, Aloha Care has been working hard to address the social determinants of health that acknowledge cultural trauma and social trauma over time by building in culturally responsive services to the work that we do, not just to our members and the patients that we cover free healthcare for, but also with our providers, our provider network, and the work that's being done with culturally anchored solutions in the community health centers. To us, the answer is culture, and most specifically, it's the reactivation of this culture and this healthy identity that can bring about innovative solutions in times when we see a weakened public health system and when we see attacks to the social safety net programs. We believe that this is an enduring legacy to place, and so at Aloha Care, we're centralizing culture into the solutions that we envision healthy communities through. That's values, that's place, and that's people. And so I wanted to provide just an illustration of how are we getting there, right? What's a story, what's an example? Just like I painted the picture on the 62-year-old woman, that's the average caregiver in Hawaii, that looks very much like my mom, who's downstairs caring for my son right now as he gets ready to go back to school so I can be with you all today. I wanted to paint a picture of the amazing network of women who are on the front lines right now doing this work every day. And so I think about my friend ʻŌiwi, and ʻŌiwi runs a 12-person team at Aloha Care. During this pandemic, our organization has seen hundreds of births, including those to single mothers. And so our team, nurses just like her, are getting worked. They're working together through our generative network. So ʻŌiwi is a nurse. She used to work on clinical floors, and now she leads a great team at Aloha Care. We had a baby that was born to a mother on our plan who had severe complications. And so before this baby is allowed to transition home, during a pandemic, mind you, her whole team has been working together with that mother and the pediatrician, the NICU, the care coordination team, and through our health plan to get that baby home safely. They did this just before the hurricane and just before we all started to batten down the hatches to make sure that folks like us are able to be home and safe with our families. And so a complication arrived. Because this baby needs additional support, they needed to have a very specific crib for the baby to go home with. That crib was not available anywhere in Hawaii. And so what ʻŌiwi and our team did at Aloha Care is to quickly act across all of these networks and all of these change makers and leaders in healthcare to make sure that that crib was purchased and paid for, shipped to, and arrived to Hawaii for free for that mother and her family so that baby is home safe now. These are the types of difficult and uncomfortable conversations we have to start to have, where solutions that are not typically found in the healthcare industry are a part of every story that we start to uplift and embed into the work that we do, especially those needs for better prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal care that is part of the resiliency recovery model. We have to collaborate more as local experts with community-based organizations. We have to build in strategies that are rooted in Hawaii and create interventions that go beyond typical workflows and business lines. I talked to you about that as I hope that we'll go back into time a little bit, and I wanted to bring forth this place, a place that is special to me. Eia ho'i ka wahipana o Moku'ula, this sacred place of Moku'ula. On the left, you'll see an artistic rendering of this place that we know as Moku'ula today. Mokuhinia, a place of Kihavahine, the sacred place of Keopu'olani. This place is where we would refer to in present day as Lahaina on the island of Maui. That's my aina kupuna. I talk about this place because if you were to go there in present day, just as I was shortly before the flights ended due to the coronavirus and the grounding of all air travel, this is what you would see at that sacred place today. Our wahi kapu, our wahi wahine are behind these layers of trash. Next to Moku'ula is a car park ride, which is situated across the street from heavily industrialized tourist areas. Behind the gated fence is where you will see our sacred foundation and the pohaku, the upright pohaku that talks about this place. And it talks about the chiefesses and our mo'owahine that our people know of as this place prior to Lahaina and the tourism industry. This is what you would see today. And I think it's really troubling when we think about the metaphor of what it looks like for our most celebrated and storied wahine and women of our past that we are descendants of. What happens when those women are chained behind fences? And what does that metaphor serve for us today, in where many women and girls and trans and non-binary women find themselves in 2020? I want to talk about really quick in a organization and a Native Hawaiian woman business leader, Mahina Paishan Duarte, who is trying to change those conditions, where we're not looking to fence in our roles or our mo'olelo anymore, where we're building in resilience hubs that are based on community care and mutual care of one another, where local producers and leaders are at the core of the operating models and lines of business are decentralized, and the hierarchies are now in a circle and a peva, where we bring and restore our mana, our mauliola, and our ea. These are great places. I'm lucky enough to be a co-worker of Vai Collective. We are strengthening our social networks. We have gathering spaces once again, and we are amplifying community grassroots organizations so we can have safe conversations just like these. And so some of the work that we've done this year is to create Nalawa Hina, which is a co-mentoring group with Native Hawaiian women and girls led by Kumu, Dr. Hokulani Holt. These images here are what happens when we decolonize the table and we actually get rid of the table and we meet on the mat and we come together to create kapa, when we come together to create a new story of regeneration and resilience. And so I think Auntie Lei, I think Auntie Hoku, and the women that are guiding us to this resilient future, so that wahine, like I, am able to continue to be integrated as a whole person, as a kanaka, as a scientist, and an advocate that does this work, but doesn't abandon our traditions along the way, so that our traditions always serve as that foundation and that bedrock. And so we can come together at places like Moku'ula, and we can chant the names of Keopu'olani and Kiha Wahine once again, and that they are part of all of the work that we're doing and the resilience that we lead. Whether we're a CEO or the executive director of organizations, or we're young girls in elementary school, these are important ways that we're reactivating that resilience of the matriarchy once again. I'm going to turn it over to Khara now, and she's going to share some really important work that she's been leading through the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women, and hope that we have ahead for the resilience recovery.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Hey, everybody, I'm Khara. As introduced, I'm speaking on behalf of the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women, which is a government agency, so it's a little bit unusual to have a government official or a bureaucrat talk about decolonization. So I want to give you some background about where I'm coming from, my analysis, and why I believe wherever we are fighting from, whatever resources or institution we have at our disposal, we can use that for power building and to advance and carry the burden of colonization on the way to independence and self-determination for Native Hawaiians and for communities around the world. So for me, I identify as a feminist, and I define our agency as feminist in practice. But not everybody's familiar with that movement or that term, so I just want to kind of break it down. So at its core, feminism is a movement an action and also a school of thought with many different theories that have been built by women to counteract this system that privileges men as a group over women, over femme-identified people, non-binary people, anyone who is basically cast as female or feminized. And so feminist theory is really rooted in the time before patriarchy. And that's really something that seems profound to many people because the culture and the society and the attitudes that we're born into seem really natural, right? We're told, one of the things that I hear all the time, for example, is, you know, prostitution is the oldest profession. That's something that we hear a lot in the women's space. And we're just supposed to accept all of these Western practices that are deeply patriarchal as timeless and inevitable and unchangeable. But feminist theory really looks to our past and to the origins of the Western, specifically in our context, Euro-American hyper-patriarchy, and looks to our history as a site of hope, as a site of analysis, and an example of a time when women's leadership, experience, and knowledge were inherently respected and valued. That's not to romanticize the past, but it is a really important part of our framework. So we view the COVID-19 crisis. I have a baby waking up. Sorry, I may have to quickly give him over to dad. But we view the COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity to do what the powers of the status quo are doing, which is really fight against this urge to restore the system and the economy before COVID that really wasn't working for women and wasn't able to deliver gender equality. So we wanted to create a feminist economic recovery plan for COVID-19, which I'm going to share a little bit more about in the next slide. But we called it feminist because in a sexist society that we live in, a colonized, westernized, sexist society, if a policy or a program is not explicitly pro-women or feminist, then it is anti-women, if not in its intention, in its impact. And we see that all the time. And you know, for us as a commission on the status of women, feminism in practice also means doing things differently. So during COVID-19, we see across the world and in Hawaii, governments exploiting this moment to bypass democracy, to fast track policies, plans, and funding without actual input and democratic processes. And so we wanted to do the opposite. And that's actually how Dr. Fox and I started really working in depth together through this collaborative process where we created a group of women from across sectors and expertise and ages and ethnicities, and put together a plan that was inclusive of more than just government and elite voices. So we, back in really early, actually in March, we saw the writing on the wall. You know, we saw what was happening around the world, and as women, this was adding up to be an incredibly gendered crisis. So we knew, you know, when we saw the lockdowns and the schools closing, all of those things from a woman's point of view spell disaster in a different way that they do for men. And we didn't want to just do the rapid response. We also wanted to have our voices included in the plan out of this crisis, which we knew was already being built. And so in March, I was given these 4 questions. And this was kind of the origin story of the plan. I got these questions from one of our legislature's budget committees. And I got it early in the morning on a Wednesday, and I woke up and the instructions were to answer these questions and submit them by noon. If you're reading these questions, some of them are, if not all of them, are extremely challenging and unanswerable in 3 or 4 hours. For example, how would you restructure the economy? And so I knew then that this was not a sincerely inclusive process. And so we set out to answer these questions as a group. And so we created this report over the course of about a week, which was an incredible feat for a group of mostly working moms full-time. But I hope that you read it if you haven't, because it is the first of its kind in not just the United States, but also the world. And what we did was, in response to the first question, be really clear about what smart macroeconomic policy is, and demonstrating that we're familiar with economics and that women have an analysis of economics, and bleeding out key programs from the government. So the social safety net is truly unwise for a host of reasons. So we made a really clear stance that this could not in any way, cuts, furloughs to essential programs could not in any way be part of our state's economic recovery. We also wanted to focus on reorienting the economy away from tourism, militarism, and luxury development and other harmful industries for women. And so set out a plan that would allow that painful transition to happen. And one of those was investing in subsistence living, because a key core component of this plan is really being place-based, looking to Native Hawaiian practices, traditions, and values to guide us out of the crisis. Another big component of the plan is what to do with all of this earth-shattering money from the federal government. And we wanted to really emphasize that a feminist future and recovery would prioritize healing and support for Native Hawaiian communities. So we were clear that we wanted a 20% pro rata share of the federal funding to go specifically to Native Hawaiians to use as they see fit for recovery. So what happened after we released that document? Well, I can tell you, even though at first it was kind of quiet on the home front, that within 48 hours, CNN called, the BBC called, and by now we've had almost 100 international, national organizations, including half a dozen United Nations agencies, reach out to us, do trainings with us on the plan. And we also became the first place in the United States, possibly the world, to pass legislation committing to a feminist economic recovery. And that occurred on Maui under the leadership of Council Member Keani Rollins-Fernandez. So this is a really important piece of legislation, even though it's a resolution, because they're using it to guide the funding that they got, which is tens of millions of dollars from the federal government to make sure that that addresses women's needs and women's programming. And now the momentum has built. Just this week, we learned that Northern Ireland, parts of India, and also Canada have used our plan and emulated our plan to build their own based on their crisis affecting women in their respective countries. And this is being acknowledged as starting in Hawaii. So if there's anything I can say about this, it's really that, this collaboration of women of color and Native Hawaiians looking to our cultures, looking to our values to define what we want, is actually shaping the international conversation on the recovery from COVID-19. And it's an incredible thing. So a little bit about what we can do in a concrete way out of this and what we have done in the past. So what about policy? What about concrete ways that we can materialize the plan? If we want to reorient the economy and have this economy where women are not dependent on the state, on abusive men, on waged work to be able to survive. How do we get there? How do we address, the endless issues affecting women because we're a subordinate class? So this is just a little sneak peek of what we did last year, because like Dr. Fox mentioned, you know, we are about gender justice, you know, as a bigger movement as well. So we helped work to pass the No License to Discriminate law, which just became available. So you can now get a driver's license. It removed basically the gender binary from our state IDs and driver's licenses, which was really important because we knew that our non-binary and transgender sisters and community was facing discrimination as a result of having to prove who they were on their identification, and even going so far as needing medical documentation to match what was being used as this rigid identity in the eye of, you know, state bureaucrats, landlords, employers. And so we have a mass sign up on September 4th, if anyone wants to join us in Waianae at 3 o'clock to get a gender X on your license, just as an FYI. We also really focused for the first 2 years talking about the impact of militarization and colonization on women's bodies themselves. So trying to uplift the issue of commercial sexual exploitation, because we know that, you know, the Puritan settler state really blames women for men's exploitation. And this is a form of state violence, quite frankly. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was to allow any woman who's been convicted of a prostitution conviction a second chance and to end that stigma. And so anyone now in Hawaii, and we're the only state to have this option, anyone who's been convicted you know, for selling themselves, for surviving, can now vacate and expunge their record. And this is a first, again, in the United States. And you don't have to prove sex trafficking victimization, which we know is not realistic for most people. So these are just some of the, you know, some of our past, but what about where we're heading, you know, after coronavirus and with the Feminist Economic Recovery Plan? So some of the things that we're seeing right now that we're looking towards policy for 2021, these are some of the things that have come up. Universal basic income, or, you know, some people are already suggesting a compromise, like a guaranteed income pilot project for women or moms, you know, so that these types of economic shocks and dependency on work when we have to caregive no longer affect women in a devastating way. Another thing is discrimination protection for domestic violence victims. I'm getting a lot of concerns from neighborhood boards and from constituents that, you know, we're hearing fights in the middle of the night, you know, ever since lockdown, I don't know what to do. And landlords can use this and are using this to evict women because, you know, under nuisance laws are saying, you know, we don't like drama in our building. This is too much drama. So we don't, as a state, don't have a protection like that at the state level. There's also reproductive health reform, because we've seen here in Hawaii that we just did a poll of single moms, and a chunk of them have seen reproductive health care access interrupted during COVID-19 for a host of different reasons. So Planned Parenthood is taking the lead on that. We also want to shift to a public health model for sex trafficking. So I'll tell you this, demand for paid sex during COVID-19 has not gone down in Hawaii. It may have actually increased. So what our Attorney General is anticipating, as well as other folks in the criminal justice space that work on this issue, is an increase in sex trafficking after COVID-19, and even now as the lockdown is letting up, because of the economic stresses, and also because men who are feeling extra stress due to the economic crisis, extra self-loathing, are turning to buying as an outlet and a source of release, and exploiting vulnerable people. So that's another piece of legislation related to COVID-19 that we're still honing. And this process is really inclusive. So the Commission on the Status of Women doesn't just decide what the program is and what the bills are going to be for 2021. there are, many different grassroots and nonprofit community-based organizations that we work with that articulate what they think a solution should be, and we assist in developing that policy and working with legislators or direct to legislators. So we have our group called the Feminist COVID-19 Response Team, but it's one of many coalitions uniting in political sisterhood, centering women, and in particular working class women, Native Hawaiian women, immigrant women who are seen as living on the extreme margins, who don't get that voice in government directly. Again, we're going beyond just the mutual aid in this moment, which is extremely critical, not to minimize that, but focusing to and making sure we're united around our goal and long-term goal advocacy. So this is one of the last slides, and this week was really hard because we saw our third femicide or killing of a woman for being a woman during COVID-19. And one of the telltale signs of living in a patriarchal society is widespread violence in the home. We're hearing so many conversations, and there's a revolution around community safety, state violence, police brutality, and anti-Blackness. We want to make sure that we're not leaving out the intersection of racism and sexism, that we're not leaving out the fact that for most people, home is the most dangerous place. It's a place full of sexual and physical violence. And we've seen during COVID-19, and there's some local specifics on this slide, that domestic violence has increased at the global level and at the local level. So nationally in the United States, DV calls in crisis have increased by 40%. Locally, the increase has been 68% at last check. Also, this is really disconcerting, although not particularly unusual from HPD, but there have been a spike in arrests of women, the victims. And I know that they're the victims because in May, for example, there were 41 arrests of women for domestic violence. 28 of those 41 women were pre-existing clients receiving help for domestic violence from DVAC. And so we know something's going wrong here, where abusers are basically colluding with the state, or the state is colluding with abusers because they're not getting trained, they're not taking domestic violence seriously, and they're actually being wittingly or unwittingly used to keep women under control and in these abusive situations. And just a couple days ago, a woman in Makiki was murdered by her partner. And the timing is incredibly tragic and tragically ironic, because the Commission on the Status of Women, led by our incredible intern Jayla, is going to be launching a community-based project called the Femicide Free Zone in Makiki next Friday, which I can share a little bit about. So all of these groups and categories of women, I don't know, Dr. Fox, if you wanted to jump in, please do. But these are all the issues that we work on and focus on. And so, we invite anyone here who wants to be a part of our coalition and especially to shape the policy for next year.
Yeah, I'll just share really quick. Thanks, Khara. I'll just share that these are also many of the areas that we have been tracking through great data, including the data that Khara had shared. So it's not always just federal or state data and surveillance systems. We're also looking at great organizational data. So all of this can combine to tell a story. What we're also making sure that we track, especially those of us in our industry, we're quite familiar with this, is we're tracking best practices. And we're we're tracking evidence and evidence-informed interventions. And so it's important for us in the work that we do to make sure that we're weaving all of these great information points and these nodes into creating this generative network. And so when there's a call, for example, on what is the minimum wage that is appropriate for Hawaii, for example, due to the high cost of living, due to the specific industries that we have, we know that that's based off of very good evidence locally that's Hawaii based, and it's also based off of really good evidence for other top 10, luxury, tourist destinations from around the world that see pretty similar disparities in their populations, right? So all of this comes together, I think, to work in really great communication and collaboration and partnership towards action. And so I just wanted to make that one simple addition to the great information that Khara had shared.
Dr. Fox, do you want me to introduce this one? Okay, sorry everybody. Awkward pause for a minute there, but right now we want to make sure that we're being interactive and hearing your voice too. And so we wanted to use a chat feature. I'm hoping all of you are familiar right there at the bottom. If you click on it and can participate in answering this question. So here it is. What is one action you can take to champion recommendations from the Feminist Economic Recovery Plan in your community or in your organization? I know we don't go over the whole thing, but anything that you picked up on, we'd love to hear answers in the chat briefly. We'll give you a minute or two.
We do have a question in the Q&A. Is there an intersection for where therapy is within need to decolonize health? I am a Native Hawaiian marriage and family therapist intern and really want to focus my energy and attention to the Native Hawaiian indigenous community.
Great question, and an important question for you to be asking during your internship. I am happy to share that on Tuesday, there will be a webinar focused on this conversation around behavioral health, specifically highlighting community intervention and community innovation at the Waimanalo Health Center. We'd be happy to share that information with you, and it might actually already be up on social media. Dr. Sherry Daniels at Papa'ololokahi and I are on a collaborative work team with the University of Hawaii at Manoa and the Pacific Health Analytics team. And this is the same topic that we realize is fundamental to bringing a bridge between great research and great practice, and then informing the community members. And so on Tuesday's panel, Waimanalo Health Center will be talking about integrated behavioral health. So Dr. Pereira, the Loea Lapa'au, Lena Albright, and Kumu Kioki Leon will be discussing some of the work that they're doing directly in Waimanalo. And Waimanalo Health Center is not alone. Other community health centers and the Native Hawaiian healthcare systems are doing this work too. So I just really want to encourage folks to check out and contact organizations like Na Pu'uwai and Waikiki Health and Kokua-Kalihi Valley, the Waianae Coast Comprehensive Health Center. These are all places that are integrating culture and values and people into the worldview of practice and the way in which the healthcare system and the community healthcare systems can be enabling to bringing the importance and the respect to those practices into the therapeutic environment. And so I think you'll find some really great and exciting work is being done. Great question.
I see some good answers in the chat already. So you can read for yourselves, but you know, people are offering to use their different roles to advance components or also amplify the plan. And I think that, is there anywhere? And we're getting some questions too. Advocating for sick leave. I think that right now, that's such a good example of ways that you can organize where you are, because women are in such crisis, even in terms of dealing with the caregiving crisis right now. What I'm seeing is because employers, like, we're fighting at the state level to try to get the governor to make telework the default, return to that. But while that's happening, organizing your own workplaces, because it's not safe to do so as an individual to risk your job, is really important. And that is one, you know, core component of our plan, right? So that's a really good example of people already just kind of organically organizing. Did you want to add anything to that, Dr. Fox, or address any of the comments in the chat?
I wanted to highlight, we have a clinical psychologist from Hamakua Health Center who is sharing this webinar and plans to use it as a tool for training. And I think that that's important too to these conversations in the action that we can take. The minimum, right, is sharing tools and resources with one another from trusted resources and from real leaders like Khara, myself, Dr. Daniels, who do this work every day, right? And so I think even if that's one action that we can do, I think that that is a phenomenal one. And that's especially important for those that are with us right now live, but also who will be watching this later, that your training and the foundation to your training, as I know, as I've been in that position, and so has Khara, right? We go through many years of education within the academy, within the institutions that we are enrolled in, and it's really important that the foundation of that learning is balanced. And if we're talking about equity and justice and self-determination in all policies, we should be talking about equity and justice and self-determination in education and training and capacity building, continuing education over time.
Great. I was just answering in the Q&A too. You know, folks are asking, well, how do we plug into this work since it's a living, moving movement now? And so I just threw up my email address. We have a lot going on. And if anybody wants to check it out, you can plug into us there, or you can also DM each of us on our social media accounts.
We are probably better at responding through our DMs than we are at our emails. Since Khara and I are both working moms, it's something that we're also trying to talk about in the actions that are equitable, is also understanding with care and grace and compassion that these solutions need to happen even right in our own organizations and the agencies that we work with. So if you're a manager or a boss or a supervisor and you have the ability to look at telework options and to look at staggered work times and work environments, that's another great way to start as well. Khara, would you like me to move to the next question? And Lisa, if you see any chats come up or questions come up to you, please feel free to read them out as well. Khara, with this one, do you want to just intro the program that you're working to develop and some of the context to this?
Yeah, so you know, there's a lot of talk about the Green New Deal. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that. And of course, you know, the green economy, regenerative economy, climate crisis. And there's a lot of rhetoric around that being equitable. But in Hawaii, we know that, you know, green infrastructure jobs, trades and construction primarily, that are high paying, prevailing wage and unionized, are like abysmal in terms of numbers of women participating. And it's not just as simple as, well, maybe it's because they don't have childcare to do the apprenticeship program. It's more complicated than that, actually. And what we've found in talking to the unions and DLIR is that women really need an active, proactive, and gender sensitive and aware pipeline or pre-apprenticeship program in order to get into these industries and stay in, you know, in these really male dominated spaces. So we've started that already. We're starting a program and we're gonna specifically look to survivors. So I know that being a woman means being a survivor in this kind of culture. It's very rare to not have survived some form of violence. And that's who we're gonna be prioritizing in the recovery for these sectors that are targeted for stimulus. So look out for that. You can be in, you know, if you're looking for a job in these industries or have an idea, like if you're on a campus and want to help out, that would be huge. But that's kind of the context of this question, and to brainstorm on it. So what would it look like for Hawaii to become a national leader with an innovative gender equity job pipeline program that prioritizes pay equity, decision-making, and paid leave, for example, for local residents? What would that look like to you? What would a program maybe in your area look like that is actually supportive and equitable for women? So I guess we're gonna have you throw that up again in the chat as well. It'd be great to hear too, like what areas you work in, right? As your frame for this question.
While people are sharing, I just want to share a comment that I had seen from Representative Peruso in the chat, and she brought up a really good point about how do we look at ways to support and uplift women who live in rural areas. Absolutely critical of importance, and I really commend legislators like you for helping to remind us to not always be Honolulu and Oahu centric, that we need to be talking about the rural areas. When those of us who work in health and medicine, we know that rural areas typically come with the designation as a medically underserved area, according to the federal US Health and Human Services. And so there are ways in which we can prioritize some of the federal and national priorities and dollars to make sure that those also reach our rural communities as well. And that cuts to women's health and women's care really shouldn't be one of our priorities or even on the decision-making table for rural areas who already have lack of access to care and who already suffer from disparities in measurable quality of care. And so that's really important points. I'm reading through some of the comments, and quickly, I think even just re-highlighting again, the Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship Program is a key innovative pipeline program that I think has really tried to incorporate a lot of these principles and values over a generation of Native Hawaiian health scholars and clinicians and advocates. And so I think it would be great even to see in the chat if folks were a beneficiary of or maybe used to manage programs like that. I think it's great to celebrate those as well, that Hawaii has done great work in certain sectors to increase the numbers of women and representation of girls from early ages. I want to just give an aloha to any of the girls from the Seeds of Peace Girls Talk Back program. They just finished their presentations last night. We've been mentoring high school girls for this summer, and I know some of them are tuning in. It's another example where we can start even younger with having these conversations, and I think it often shocks the mentors and the program administrators that these girls, 14 and 15 years old, are asking questions about reproductive justice, and they're asking about what happens when you see congressmen on the TV attacking honorable representatives. What happens when you're not seeing yourself represented in the sciences or in technology or in the STEM fields? Those are all questions that the girls have been asking us as their mentors and the program administrators this summer. And I think we need to be asking ourselves these questions right alongside with while we mentor and train the next generation alongside us, and not look at them as the future. We have to look at them as the now. Khara, there's I see a question around like housing here. If there's some work that we can share about just more of what the local housing advocates have been especially championing, that would be great. And then
I'm looking for the question. Sorry, I'm looking through.
I think it's Summers.
A lot of great ideas in here. I see.
Yeah.
So even talking about how using like a feminist green recovery, what that could look like in Hawaii, since we already have such a, we're a couple steps ahead, I think, even though there is national organizing on this, that I do want to recognize that we're kind of the first out there. I mean, like I said, with this like budding pipeline that we're trying to create with DLIR, we could use so much support for that to get the word out, because, what we're seeing now is the Chamber of Commerce proposing, well, here's like McDonald's is hiring. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's not a recovery from COVID-19. Like minimum wage jobs that were precarious and terrible for women are not a recovery from COVID-19. So, focusing on like a feminist green recovery, I love that idea.
Yeah, I think that's an important point is, because Khara and I both work to defend the social safety net. We're not talking about low wage, low benefit jobs and occupations here in this vision. We're really talking about setting the standard much higher than that for, the next 10 years of where we go. I will share, Summer, with your comment around housing and single moms. I just wanted to highlight one of the community partners that we work with at the Domestic Violence Action Center. They've recently set up a real novel, innovative program at Hale Maluhia. And it is an in-residence service program for survivors. I believe all of the residents currently have children, and many of them have multiple children, and they're able to live at Hale Maluhia at an incredibly low rate, because that's subsidized through the work that they do. But what's really important to share, that this great innovation has seen such a demand and a need that their wait list is now double the amount of people that they're currently even able to house in Hale Maluhia. And so we also know that that's something that we have to address as well, is for sustainability of great programs that we want to see continue and to be able to expand.
Well, I think we're almost at time, so I want to be mindful of that. If there's anyone who wants to throw up any last thoughts on this one question, we're happy to take them. Otherwise, we'll move on in a second.
There is a question if you could share info on how folks might get involved with the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women.
Sure, I will throw up some of the handles to our social media accounts, which is a good way to keep involved because we have that event coming up next Friday. And that's a perfect opportunity. It will be socially distant. Opportunity to sign up with us and to get to know us and you know, join kind of the mobilization. So I'm going to give you that right now. And Dr. Fox, did you want to start with this and then I can maybe share some of the logistics?
Sure. So I just, I wanted to go back to where we had started, right? Where Khara and I are really circular in our thinking and our strategies. And so are many of the leaders in our network. I had just put up some of their quotes around how do we build back better and how do we build not across the backs of women and immigrants and people of color and people living in poverty. I wanted to just bring forward this olelo no eo as we continue to always ground ourselves in our culture, in our values, and our place, where I think each one of us can continue to hold space and hold thought and hold good intentions to act for. It's important for Khara and I to always share we're not just talking about statistics, that each one of these statistics is always the amalgamation of stories of real women. And so we try to bring those real women and their families and that sisterhood into the work that we do. Though we often work at that policy level, at the aggregate, we never lose sight in the individual, in that individual's family, in the communities that have experienced real hardships during this time. And so we're honoring those women right now, and we're always honoring those women in the work that we do, in the fight that we lead together. So kula wai maka ue ka opua. When our tears fall, it's because our kupuna are saying that the clouds are weeping. So this is something that we say in honor of those who have lost their life, and that we look back to our spirituality and our akua and our aina, that we are intimately connected in our emotions in the work that we do, so that these tears are not in vain and that they're not lost. It's so that we can actually bring systemic end to just these systemic disruptions and inequities.
And as heartbreaking as the latest femicide was and this ongoing issue, I think the question for us is really to allow ourselves to imagine what would it be like if even just in our neighborhood, like I live in Makiki and that's where the project is centered. What if in our neighborhood, we decolonize this neighborhood? Okay, there's not gonna be any violence against women in this neighborhood, period. We're gonna campaign, we're gonna canvass, we're gonna sign wave, we're gonna put up signs, there's gonna be resources everywhere. It's gonna be in the neighborhood board, we're gonna be in the news, we're gonna be in the, I mean, like we can do that. And that's what we're gonna do in Makiki, and not just Makiki, but we want it to grow outside of Makiki, and we're doing that next Friday. So if you can, like I've never seen a sign wave just saying we value women. So imagine that message during rush hour. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it this Friday. So in the spirit of feminism, decolonization, and a future that is safe and protective of the strongest part of our community, women, we're going to be gathering. So there are the details, and we hope to see you. We have signs for you too, so no need bring any type of signs. We got you. You just need to show up with your mask, of course, and we hope to see you there.
Decolonizing the communities that we live in. Ayo, I feel like that is a perfect way to end today's webinar with Papa Ololokahi in the Ola na ʻŌiwi series. Again, on behalf of Khara and myself, Aloha Care, and the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women, we just want to thank you all for those that are with us live. And again, many of you that are with us live have shared that you're going to be sharing this recording and the slide deck with your trainees, with your staff in the organizations you work with. So whatever time you find us yourselves connecting with us and this work and the values we bring to decolonizing health and envision a resilient recovery needed for women and girls. We are here with you. We see you. We have aloha for you, and we're here to work with you. This is our contact information. Like we said, please don't hesitate to get in contact with any of us and any of the other brilliant women, Mahu, trans, two-spirit leaders that we work with every day. And we champion their work today of all days on La Ho'iho'i'ea as well. So I'll turn it back over to Papa Ololokahi and Lisa as they close us out for this afternoon.
Well, mahalo nui loa for that really inspiring, powerful presentation and message. I have to honestly say that I feel very proud to be a Native Hawaiian woman, and I'm very lucky to have been a host of this presentation with you. And as I had said in the beginning, for everyone, that everyone who has registered will receive the recording of this presentation, the PowerPoint, and also the links that they have shared. And we've also, the questions in the chat will automatically be saved. So just to let you know, you are automatically going to be added to our email group for all of our future presentations. And this actually concludes our year for the series. The series for this year was meant to reflect on a sense of place and how that affects us as Native Hawaiians and our health. So our upcoming series starts on the second Friday of August. We have 2 presentations a month, the 2nd and 4th of every month. And this next year, we're going to actually focus on Malama and Pono. All these presentations this past year, how we're going to actually apply it and put it into changes of behavior and processes and partnerships. And so we're really excited about next year's series. We have intended to make it gender diverse, age diverse, and island diverse. So it's not so Oahu centric. And so we have a lineup that we'll share with everyone via email for the next couple of months. But I'd also like to mahalo Kim Burney for helping me with the webinar. She also has other webinars that she features through Papa Ololokahi, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to her.
Mahalo, Lisa, and fabulous presentation, Khara and Dr. Kealoha Fox. I really appreciate that. Many years ago, I did some work for the State Commission, and so I'm really proud of the work, the real progressive work that is going on right now. Papa Ololokahi does have many different series going on today at 3 o'clock, and it's really just a coincidence. We have our Kukulu Keola Ha'ehu series. That's once a month, and that's produced by our own Babette Galang, and it features different kupuna practitioners of the traditional Hawaiian healing arts. And today we feature, today at 3 o'clock, we feature Kahu Ikaika Dombringus and Ho'oponopono Pono practitioner, Howard Pe'a, and a Kako'o, Auntie Bernie Freitas from Hui Malama Ola na ʻŌiwi. And we're really excited to be able to talk to them. And that's going to close out our series for this week. But that's like the 5th presentation we've had this week. Next week, we will continue with a webinar related to the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander COVID-19 response team, for which we serve as one of the backbone organizations. And some of our sessions in the past have been Ask a Kauka. We featured community health workers this week. And soon we're going to be presenting some of the data people that are looking at the disaggregation of data, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders in particular. On Friday, we will be bringing our library and archive interns in, Kala Domingo and Maka Malesia, and they will be doing a presentation digging into some of the original resources, original Hawaiian language resources, to present really fascinating stuff that delves into the history of Hawaiian health, medicine, and healing. So stay tuned. We are also spread out across all the 3 major social media platforms, and we'll post them there as soon as we have the opportunity. And thanks for sharing. Thanks for giving us the opportunity, Lisa.
Mahalo. We did have a question. What was the group that's presenting this for this afternoon?
Oh, I'm sorry, today's 3 o'clock presentation, the series is called Kukulu Keola Ha'ehu. And the 3 panelists will be Howard Pe'a, Ikaika Dombrigues, who are traditional, Kupuna traditional practitioners from Hawaii Island, and a Kako'o, Bernie Freitas. So the focus is going to be on Hawaii Island practitioners. And the name of it is, thank you for asking, the name of it is The Past Will Save Our Future, a title chosen by those practitioners. And Papa Ololokahi presents it.
All right, mahalo.
Mahalo.
If no one else has any more questions, mahalo for joining us, and everybody, malama pono, and we'll keep in touch, okay?
Mahalo. Aloha.